looking into the alleged hate crime against Empire actor Jussie Smollett are examining a threatening letter sent last month. Now, a source told our CBS Chicago station WBBM, quote, when the letter didn't get enough attention, Smollett concocted the staged attack. Dean Reynolds is outside Chicago Police headquarters. Dean, good morning.
Good morning. Chicago police have stopped calling Smollett the victim in this case and are referring to him now merely as the individual who reported the incident. And CBS News has learned two brothers admitted to the police that the actor paid them to fake that incident.
Smollett was upset the letter didn't get a bigger reaction and decided to orchestrate the attack. CBS News has learned the Osundairo brothers have now admitted to police Smollett hired them to stage the assault. Investigators have requested a follow-up interview with Smollett, who has repeatedly denied faking the attack.
I'm pissed off. How do you not believe that? It's the truth.
Smollett's lawyers say he knows the brothers, one of whom was his personal trainer.
So that's the last reporting. And there was some reporting this afternoon that, and again, it's just source reporting about investigating whether the original letter was real or sent by him or an ally. Let me ask you first, if someone gives a fake report to the police, what's the charge?
In Illinois, it's a charge that falls within the disorderly conduct statute, but disorderly conduct is a very large tent with a lot of different things within it. And within that crime is making a false report to a peace officer or some other public official. It is in Illinois a class 4 felony and up to 3 years incarceration. It is a felony. It's a serious crime. And I have to tell you, from the outset, I think if anything about this is a teachable lesson, if ultimately Smollett gave a false report and reported a crime that did not happen, I think the lesson that everyone needs to learn is that people don't realize how much of what we do is tracked, video cameraed in public areas. To make up or concoct any kind of story, the police can often verify it in ways that you didn't even imagine, not just based on what they have from the night of, but also based on your conduct in the days preceding. And just from the outset, I have to tell you, this report, all the issues of race and or sexual orientation aside, there were parts of this report that just seemed just odd. As someone who's read a number of police reports, and you as a former prosecutor would know that there were some items about this report that just seemed too conspicuously coincidental.
Give me
I'll give you a perfect example.
Does something jump out?
Yeah, definitely. The notion of the idea that there was the fact that a group may have walked by at 3 a.m. and beat someone up, that happens unfortunately a lot in city areas. They've downgraded them from victim to person who made the report. So I think there's a lot of evidence that everything is not as Smollett has reported it. But I mean, if he ends up having given a false report, it will be largely because, and I found this in my personal experience as a criminal defense attorney, people don't realize that it's not that easy to fabricate a story because there's just too much data, too much evidence that we generate day to day, and too much for the police to corroborate or dispute or disprove if they need to.
You know, there's a big discussion in the media, not a legal discussion, but a media discussion, generally defined a lot where people stood politically. But did people over-respond to this, the first charges when he came out and he wanted Good Morning America? But if someone makes a report to the police and says, this is what happened to me, how do you not say, well, that's believable? Are we supposed to now not believe? And that would be really unfortunate. You don't believe anybody who makes any charge to the police.
I might get in trouble here, but I gotta tell you something. And I'm not just being a company man at all, but I will say that I was very proud. I felt that NBC, at the beginning, like I said, I was cautious about this, only because I hate to say it, after reading so many police reports, there are sometimes things that just raise your hackles. Something just it seemed too opportunistic. It seemed too odd, some facts of the case. Not that there was a late night altercation. That happens every night on the weekend.
Right.
But I was very proud of how NBC, the vibe was very cautious. And remember, just as you said, what they were reporting was what was reported to the police. There were other outlets and other, on social media, there were a lot of outlets that made this into a more cultural issue. But on the whole, I felt like there was a lot of caution, and I felt like the outlets I'm familiar with and the one where I get to work was very careful about reporting only the known facts. And you could say that this was a media creation, but just as you pointed out, I would dispute that because the media was largely reporting, at least the mainstream media was reporting what was reported.
Right. I mean, what can you do? I mean, if someone, that's my point. If someone goes to the police, makes a police report, and they're exposing themselves to potential criminal liability if they're lying, you're going to at least, you can reasonably rely on that. This is a story someone told, and I guess you can couch and go, well, this is the reporting. Like Reverend Al Sharpton had Jussie on the day before he was attacked. Yeah. Like that weekend, he had him on his own show. So he knew him and he was very upset by it. And then this weekend, though, when the story began to evolve, so did Reverend Al on the issue. And I like Reverend Al. I've been on his show quite often lately. Here, I want to play a clip of Reverend Al talking about accountability, actually, though, on both sides now. And because the concern of someone like Reverend Al, who's a civil rights activist and an activist for communities of color, is that if it's a false reporting, it could really hurt others going forward in the future. Let's hear clip number 10, please.
To find out what happened, and the guilty should suffer the maximum. I still maintain that. And if it is found that Smollett and these gentlemen did in some way perpetrate something that is not true, they ought to face accountability to the maximum. But let's not act like this is some left-wing hoax that some are saying on social media. President Trump called this horrible, and he's certainly not a left-winger. And many across the spectrum, because of Smollett's history as an actor and an activist, stood and said this needs to be looked into. None of us talked directly with him. We were alarmed at what was reported.
I think it was a good point that when Trump was asked about it, he said, oh, it's a horrible act, all that kind of stuff. Everyone's based on what's reporting. So from a societal point, well, let me ask you, in your practice, had you seen many hoaxes?
I don't want to call it a hoax, but anytime you have a domestic case, you have two stories, A and B, that could not be. They don't share a single fact in common. I mean, or any assault on the street. I mean, hey, there's a bar fight, and you ask each side what happened, and it's a completely opposite story. It's a recurring theme when I talk about this stuff. There's such a primal human instinct for self-preservation that I almost wouldn't say you can call it lying. I think it's just the brain does whatever it can to preserve its righteousness, to stay out of prison and stay out of trouble. And so anytime any police officers out there who are listening to this, they know if they've ever separated two folks after a bar fight or a domestic disturbance, they get two stories that are ridiculously nothing like each other. And the only way they can often really determine what happened is from circumstantial evidence or things that are in front of them, the empty bottle, the broken glass, things like that. So, one other thing I would add is that Smollett, I know they've asked to talk to Smollett.
Right.
His defense attorney is surely advising him, do not do that. And they've even called it an interview. And that alone should raise concerns because police trip over themselves to call something an interview. Because if it's just an interview and not an interrogation, then arguably in their mind they don't need to Mirandize you if they don't think if they create the impression in your mind that you haven't committed a crime. So the police would like nothing more than for Smollett to come in and just volunteer that, hey, I lied to you. Then they would Mirandize him, then they would arrest him, and then they would have their evidence all set to go. So I wouldn't be surprised if you don't see Smollett go back and talk to police.
So what happens if he doesn't go back? Can they still charge him?
Oh, yeah, they can definitely charge him. And in fact, assume for the
moment...
moment...
I'm not advocating charging him. I'm just saying, I'm asking if this turns out the way the reporting seems to be leading now.
Right.
And it could be wrong. So I'm just saying this is the reporting right now.
Let's just say, hypothetically, assume for the moment that he gave a false report and that this attack, as he described it, was not true. It described something that didn't happen. Then they can absolutely charge him, and it would be based. They would never have to hear from him again. That's the Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination. He would not have to take the stand, and in most cases, most criminal defendants do not take the stand at trial. So they would base it on all the statements that he gave. If they were recorded, then that helps the government. But amazingly enough, people are surprised to find that even the federal government, the FBI, only recently started recording its interviews. They did everything by notes. But what would happen is those police officers would get up there and testify as to that a complainant gave them a story and that story was false. And they would have to prove the falsity. And what an easier case that would be if Smollett wandered in there, sat down for an interview, and just admitted it. See, police are good at what they do. They'd rather not come up with probable cause to search your trunk. They'd rather just get you to consent. Similarly, with an interview, they'd rather you just admit that you did it rather than them having to go prove it. That's very irritating. That's very, it's quite a burden.
Let me ask you, in the big picture here, now you've got a situation where if it turns out this is not true, I'm concerned about the impact on society. I mean, the societal impact of this beyond legal. That when people come forward in the future and say, I was attacked by someone who happened to be wearing a MAGA hat. Let's say, assume a similar scenario. People are, come on, the last time was false. I don't believe it at all. Or even broader than that, he's from the African American and the LGBT community. That when people come forward to assert hate crimes in the future, do you think there's a concern it can have an impact, or do you think that this is really like a one-off?
I have a different take, and it's based on the fact that from the outset, me and some of my colleagues just had a bad vibe about these facts. And I think there's a positive takeaway from this. If it's determined, let's assume again, hypothetically, that Smollett gave a false report. And I think there's something promising. The reality is people make false reports. None of us will ever know why folks do it. Sometimes it's to keep themselves from being arrested.
Right.
Other times it's to get attention. And this kind of thing has happened a lot. People have faked running the Boston Marathon or winning the Boston Marathon.
I won it twice. Didn't I tell you?
That's right. Exactly. People fake things to get attention.
Right.
And there's a psychology behind that I'm not qualified to talk about, but it happens. So that will never end. But I think maybe a cultural takeaway is that the greatest threat with racism is something more subtle, something that isn't as outwardly obvious as a roving band with MAGA hats and nooses and bleach. Racism rears its ugly head in much more insidious ways in the subtle decision to hire or not hire someone that's never as overt as that.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of folks, not just me, just wondered about this kind of display of overt racism. I mean, I started wondering at the beginning of this story, if there were really guys with roving MAGA hats, that means a group got together and they all agreed that we're going to get together and run around with our MAGA hats and pour bleach on people. And look, someone out there on the phone may call and argue that, hey, that's what people are thinking. I don't really know. But the idea that you could coordinate a bunch of maniacs like that.
He was known. So the reason to me it became plausible is that he's famous, and some people may have seen him and go, "Oh, this guy hangs out here all the time, and we're going to get him."
Wait. We're not just going to get him.
The two brothers, right?
But we're going to go get our MAGA hats and a bottle of bleach. We're going to buy it at the 24-hour hardware store, and we're going to buy a noose, which you could probably fashion from rope or a belt or whatever.
Right.
But we're going to get all this equipment, and our plan is there's not one among us who says this is a bad idea. However many this group of guys in a urban, the third largest city in the country, where there's cameras probably on every corner, we're going to do this at 3 a.m. That's the part that I think. That's the part that I think police seized on, and that's why this is happening. I think that
we're going to find out more information in the next few days, and I hope we get to the bottom of it and the truth of it.
Me too.
Situation. And that's
I do too.
So when we come back, I want to talk about the big lawsuit against Trump and the emergency. But before that, Roger Stone last night posting really stunning images and statement on Instagram about the federal judge, and now he's been summoned by the judge Thursday to appear before her.
Amazing.
And where do we think this is going? Because I never saw anything like that in my life. So let's take a break. We'll come back and talk about that right here with our friend Danny Cevallos on the Dino Bidala Show. You're listening to the Dino Bidala Show, where we crush Trump's lies every single day
on Sirius XM Progress 127.
You're listening to the Dean Obeidallah Show, Sirius XM's Progress.
Welcome back. Dean Obeidallah Show. We're live. Look who's here. Danny Cevallos. He's on Facebook.com/Dean of Radio. Check it out. You can watch him live right now. Give the answers. You can watch his mouth move and sound come out at the same time. It's Marconi's dream. Marconi invented the radio. You know this?
Yes. Marconi actually plays the Mamba. Listen to the radio. Don't you remember? We built this city. Anyone? Anyone with me? Anyone?
Please.
Who's going with me?
That's the show, folks. We're done.
That's Starship, folks, formerly known as Jefferson Starship.
That was the whitest moment ever on this show in the history. That's more than a Fleetwood Mac reference.
That is Starship's best song. Starship's very best song is We Built This City.
On rock and roll?
Yeah.
I think Starship's best song may have been older stuff. Airplane. There's something.
Of course. Every Starship fans hate We Built This City.
Okay, Roger Stone.
Anyway, let's go.
Roger Stone. Let's talk Roger Stone, man. Roger Stone, we all know him, folks. He's part of Donald Trump's All the President's Con Men. And that's what they call them. And he's one of them. So Stone yesterday shares on Instagram a photo of the judge, Amy Berman Jackson, who's going to be his judge in a trial. And there's a little crosshair, not over her face, in case you didn't see it, but above her head. And writes on Instagram, through legal trickery, deep state hitman Robert Mueller has guaranteed that my coming show trial before Judge Amy Berman Jackson, an Obama-appointed judge who dismissed the Benghazi charges against Hillary Clinton and incarcerated Paul Manafort prior to his conviction for any crime, fixes in. Help me fight for my life at stonedefensefund.com. And so he posts that. All of a sudden, Twitter starts exploding, and I'm like, he'll be taking that down soon. His lawyers are going to find out. And sure enough, his lawyers filed a notice of apology.
Okay, I got to jump in. This is my favorite. So, first of all, I wrote a column maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and the title of the headline of the column was essentially, Roger Stone may be gagged by the judge, but he's probably going to violate it anyway. And what I did was write about the calculated risk. First, the court has the power to disrupt someone's free speech rights and prevent them from speaking if there's a certain standard met, and it's that it might compromise the defendant's right to a fair trial. So the court absolutely had the power to gag not only Roger Stone, but also his attorneys in their extrajudicial statements. Now, I also wrote, after that analysis, I wrote, but after all this, and the fact that they can hold him in contempt or punish him, he's probably going to violate it, or he should consider violating it. And I don't say should, I mean, he, as Roger Stone, right, he would consider violating it. Anyway, it's a calculated risk. Number one, Roger Stone views himself as the undisputed champion of press, of forming the narrative. You're basically, in his mind, you're going to cabin that incredible power with a gag order. The heck with it. I'll roll the dice. I'll take my chances. Even if she sticks me in jail, my power to affect the narrative is pretty considerable. I'm Roger bleeping Stone. You know, I can do this. And sure enough, Dean, how long did he last? No more than 2 weeks before he's potentially violating the gag order. Part two of what I find so hilarious about this is that he filed what is apparently called a notice of apology. This appears nowhere in the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, appellate procedure, civil procedure. A notice of, you know, I love this as a lawyer. I'm fascinated by what people file. And I love anytime someone files a notice of fill in the blank of something that isn't normally filed. There's no such thing as a notice of apology. It's basically a filing that was invented by his attorneys. And you know how that phone call went. They called him up, you SOB.
Take that down.
Take it down, but we're going to go a step further. You're going to sign. I looked at the filing. It's a signed apology by Roger Stone and then a notice of entry of this signed apology on the record by filing it. Absolutely. If you're somebody...
never saw the notice of apology as a new one.
I have never seen, and by the way, I've apologized to federal judges before. I've had reason to do it. I never thought that you could do it by notice of apology. I just stood up in court and apologized.
So, have you ever seen a defendant do anything like this on social media in any case you were involved with or read about before, where he was no doubt he was attacking and demeaning the judge, and potentially a veil threat, potentially with the crosshairs, maybe not. But in any event, he was being demeaning to the federal judge who's going to hear his case.
Most defense attorneys, and no doubt Roger Stone's defense attorneys have had this talk with him, that if he compromises their defense, they have to consider withdrawing representation. They have to, because if Roger Stone is going to compromise his defense, then the attorneys can't do their job. And I'll give you a quick example. If, for example, Roger Stone's maneuver here, just like Paul Manafort tried to monkey around with witnesses, and it lands him in in jail pending his trial, then that greatly magnifies the burden on the attorneys, not to mention the client. But now the attorneys, every time they want to talk to the client, have to go wait in line at the jail, put their belt and their phone through the detector, wait for their time, even though it's faster than if a normal citizen visits a prisoner. Obviously, it ain't that fast, because I've been stuck waiting in both state and federal prisons, and they take their time. Even if you are an attorney, it doesn't really matter. They got to do things their way, and their way is at their own pace, and that's for safety reasons. So just to give you an example, if for some reason this lands Roger Stone in jail, he's seriously compromised his attorney's ability to do their job. So, I mean, you may see his attorneys get subbed out.
What's your prediction Thursday, though? Because if people haven't followed this, now the judge has summoned Roger Stone, with his attorneys, of course, to appear before her Thursday to see if he violated the gag order. I assume that's why they're going to have this hearing.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the reason.
What do you predict? I mean, what do you think the judge should do to send a message to say, like, you can't threaten federal judges like this?
Right. I wrote about this, and it was really hard to get a bead on the limits and contours of a judge's ability in fashioning a remedy. I expect it would be the same as their ability to fashion a remedy under contempt. And if he's in contempt of that gag order, there are a couple different things available. I mean, could they possibly incarcerate him for contempt? Maybe. It'll be really interesting. A judge has really broad inherent power to enforce her own orders. I mean, remember, it's not like Manafort, where Manafort went out and committed a new crime, one I think he pleaded guilty to now. But it's not as if he went out and committed a new crime of witness tampering. He's violated a gag order, and that's a little different. Contempt is a little different than an actual crime, because it arises from the court's inherent power to enforce its own rules. So it'll be really interesting. The judge has a lot of discretion, and I'd be really interested to see if if she's able, maybe she puts him in jail for a few nights to think about it.
I hope so.
And if she does, she might. It's like when Obi-Wan, when Darth Vader struck down Obi-Wan, he became more powerful than you could possibly imagine.
True, but that was a movie.
Oh,
it was science fiction. That wasn't like real life.
That's
the
right.
other thing is
That's
here.
right.
Wasn't Joe Arpaio sentenced to jail for violating a federal order, actually held in contempt for violating the order?
Criminal contempt.
That's
I believe
criminal
Arpaio
contempt.
was
So this won't be
criminal
criminal contempt? This would be...
It would be, yes, I think it would fall within civil contempt, because it's a direct violation of the order, the gag order itself. Now, I may be wrong, and if Mike from San Diego, I know that guy's always trying to catch me screwing up. He's
been
constantly pestering me.
Maybe he's listening to Patriot Channel. Lately.
No, maybe he is. You're right. Maybe he turned.
Right.
Maybe he
turned them to the side
like a zombie.
So, all right, let's take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about the big case, and you wrote about it in a very popular article for NBC. I saw it on my Apple News, and it was about Donald Trump's the lawsuits right now. The lawsuits filed against Donald Trump's emergency. So let's take a break. Come back. Talk to our friend Danny Cevallos after this break about that and more. At this point, the question is not who connected to Donald Trump as a criminal. The question is anyone connected to Donald Trump who's not a criminal?
The Dean Obeidallah Show. Sirius XM Progress.
The biggest stories of the day. Right now. Right now. This is the Dean Obadala Show.
On Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live Tuesday, February 19th. Guess who's here? That's right, Santa Claus. No, Danny Cevallos is here. Legal Santa Claus. Danny, let's talk about the lawsuits against Donald Trump. But first, Stephen Colbert will help us talk about Donald Trump being ready for those lawsuits. Let's please play clip number 11.
Trump's ready for the legal challenges. In fact, he has a plan, and it goes a little something like this.
We will have a national emergency, and we will then be sued, and they will sue us in the Ninth Circuit, even though it shouldn't be there. And we will possibly get a bad ruling, and then we'll get another bad ruling, and then we'll end up in the Supreme Court, and hopefully we'll get a fair shake, and we'll win in the Supreme Court, just like the band. They sued us in the Ninth Circuit, and we lost, and then we lost in the appellate division, and then we went to the Supreme Court, and we won.
A little sing-song, don't you think? I can't tell if he was answering a question or reading his Torah portion.
I had to play that because Danny always talks about reading the Torah on the show for some reason. I'm not really sure why. But Danny, listen, what a whiny, I'm not gonna say anything more, but whininess of Donald Trump. And then we do this, and then like this.
Can
like
I
a little
say
kid
something?
crying. We're gonna do the circuit. I want to go home. Can I have ice cream? Can we go home when we go home?
But, Dean, it was actually a surprisingly accurate description of federal appellate procedure, other than a couple minor mistakes, calling the federal appeals court, the circuit court, the appellate division, which is what it is in New York State. Other than that mess up, he kind of had the civil procedure and appellate procedure down. That's the process. You get a bad ruling, you go up to the Supreme Court.
That's how Danny argues in court. You should see him in federal court. And judge would do this, and my client was like that, and he's like, I'm not going to go to jail, but I'm going to jail. So this is the leader of the Republican Party. This is a man who, a new poll came out today, 60% of Americans think the national emergency is wrong. 85% of Republicans, though, love it. Greatest thing, greatest power grab ever.
And I would add, Dean, that if you look at what a national emergency is, arguably 0% of those people matter. And actually, let me amend that. It may matter what Congress thinks if the president claims his inherent constitutional authority. However, the ability to declare a national emergency was designed so that it could be unilateral, swift, immediate, and not have to wait around for Congress to weigh in on the issue. And that's in case there was like a zombie epidemic or some other national catastrophe. What the challenge is that over the years, the government or the Congress hasn't supplied a whole lot of definition of what constitutes a national emergency.
So this emergency that Donald Trump declared would redirect $3.6 billion from military construction fund, $600 million from a Treasury Department drug forfeiture fund, and $2.5 billion from a Pentagon drug prevention program, plus taking countless miles of private land from people without any congressional approval, just doing it through him by the stroke of a pen. So now we've had several sets of lawsuits. One you wrote about was 16 states on Monday filed a lawsuit through their attorney generals against Donald Trump, led by California AG Javier Becerra. And what do states have standing? Let me ask you, just from a legal point of view, so everyone gets on the same.
So let's talk about standing, and
Right.
and it's very important in the context of these two lawsuits, because the other lawsuit where the landowners are suing, they have a much stronger case for standing.
Let's not ruin that lawsuit.
I won't.
Let's go to number one.
Let's go to
first.
number one,
All
right. And I think that standing may be a real battleground here, and I think the states know it. So what's happened is 16 states, on behalf of their attorneys general, as far as I can see, have filed suit, represented by their attorneys general, have filed suit against the Trump administration. Now, a threshold determination, a preliminary inquiry in any federal lawsuit is, does the plaintiff have standing? And without getting into a long, drawn-out definition, the easiest way to describe it is, what business is it of yours that you're allowed to file suit? You can't sue someone for something that you have no interest in, that you have no concrete stake in the outcome. You can't sue someone if a court can't give you a remedy. I mean, I can't sue the sun for sunburn. And even if I could, what kind of judgment are you going to get against the sun? This is not standing to sue the sun or anything. You can apply it in many different situations. So for about a century, there's been a general idea that, look, the federal government, the states can't sue the federal government. Sometimes they can if it's in enforcement of their own state law, if that's the issue. But it seems to me that the states are going to have a battle explaining to a court why they have the power, the standing to sue the federal government over how the federal government chooses to allocate its federal funds. Now, today, we had the MSNBC had the Attorney General of Maryland on, a very, very intelligent, well-spoken gentleman, and I had the opportunity to ask him a question. And my question
how'd that go?
It went
break
well.
him down?
No.
Like a cross?
Well, no, but he gave an answer that I did expect, which would be, and it's from the language of the complaint, that if this money is reallocated from military spending away from states like Maryland, then drug interdiction loses. In other states, military bases lose. But ultimately, yes, Maryland is affected by that, and so are the other states. But ultimately, that money is being taken from one federal pocket and put into another federal pocket. So again, it doesn't really answer fully the question for me of why is it the state's business when the federal government moves funds from one federal place to another. Now, standing can exist if it has enough of an effect, but arguably every decision that the executive makes, the federal government makes, every policy decision has some indirect effect on the state. So, again, I don't have a problem with this, but I think the implications for standing would be considerably relaxed if every single time a state didn't like something the federal government did and they could articulate some effect it has on the state or its citizens, that the state could sue the federal government. It's just, it's a possible slippery slope.
So assume, before we get to the Texas landowners and the environmental group that filed a lawsuit,
right?
What is the claim by the states that they're saying that this is unconstitutional, inappropriate?
It's a couple different claims, but the two large ones, I would say, the primary thrusts are twofold. First, that this can't possibly be an emergency if, and that has two subsections, which would be, it's been an emergency for a long time and the president didn't declare it. And part two is, he doesn't honestly believe it's an emergency. Those are good, logical arguments. The challenge I see for the states is that they may not be good legal arguments. And just to give an example, in my column I wrote today, it may be that the many laws that allow for national emergencies require only that the president say the words national emergency. Mm-hmm. There's nothing in the statute that I know of that says, but you can also subtract the words that he says that undermine the declaration of a national emergency. Now, a court may disagree with me and say, no, he has to have a good faith basis for a national emergency, and therefore his words matter. Another court might say, well, look, the only thing that matters is that he declared the national emergency. As long as he does that, anything else he says in extemporaneous speech or sarcastically on Twitter, maybe none of that matters. And I think that's going to be, once standing's determined, I think that's the next issue. But finally, and I think this is going to be a big battleground, is that I don't think there's much of a dispute that the president can declare a national emergency.
Yeah, we went through that, but the law is so broad. He can declare for anything. The question is, can he move the money around?
That's it. So the real battleground is going to be funding. Where does the money come from? That's going to be where if I'm the states, that's where they should plant their flag and make their stand, not on the semantics of whether it is or is not an emergency.
So let me play this clip for you here, where a lot of people said over the weekend, and even I go, look at, he's undermining his own argument. But how persuasive is this? Here's clip number 12.
The primary fight was on the wall. Everything else, we have so much, as I said, I don't know what to do with it. We have so much money. But on the wall, they skimped. So I was successful in that sense, but I want to do it faster. I could do the wall over a longer period of time. I didn't need to do this, but I'd rather do it much faster.
So I didn't need to do this. I could have done this over time, but I prefer to do it faster. National emergency? And does that matter, those words?
Get ready for it. This is how Trump's lawyers are going to respond to that.
Our client's an idiot. He just says crazy things.
Well, no, that is going to be said in a much nicer way. It's going to be, look, he says things off the cuff. That's who this president is. You can't mine his Twitter feed for true American public policy, because now we've all built up our immunity. And we know to take what he says with a grain of salt, Your Honor. So therefore, similarly, in principles of statutory interpretation, all that matters is that he declared a national emergency. All the yada, yada, yada that he throws out after that in tweets or in speeches is just that. It's just dicta. It's just extra surplusage. It doesn't matter.
So it's not the definitive thing. Him saying that doesn't end the case.
Right.
As much as we would love to think that.
Right.
Like,
so,
he's destroying his own case.
But I wrote this too. Federal judges in general love how should I say this? They love to punish stupidity, so that if Trump said in his own words, "This is not an emergency," essentially, I didn't need to do this, they may hold that against him, because courts, I find, like when people shoot themselves in the foot figuratively or in their briefs or whatever the case may be.
But of course, with the Muslim ban case, it went to the Supreme Court and they discounted reality and said Trump's anti-Muslim comments are not relevant to this application of is he beyond the scope of his powers in putting a ban on certain countries, while the lower courts look very carefully at Donald Trump's language and his animus towards Muslims.
Exactly. And that's where we start. And I do appreciate that. Thank goodness the American public is getting an education in how appellate courts work, and that one group of very learned folks may reach an entirely different conclusion than the next group of learned folks up the ladder. And that's exactly the situation here. I think reasonable minds can differ as to whether or not the president lawfully invoked his national emergency powers. I think it really comes down to a flip of a coin. I don't think anybody can say, unless you're just hyper partisan, that this is a slam dunk. And I've seen a lot of people write that, but I caution that, look, I mean, just from the gate, the president has these substantial, almost unfettered national emergency powers. Once we're into an analysis of whether or not he's exceeded his statutory constitutional authority, even that becomes a crapshoot. And if you look at, not to get too deeply into it, but at the tripartite analysis from Youngstown Steel, if that ever comes up, even that is a tricky analysis to determine whether the president's power is at its highest level or at its lowest ebb.
And we touched on one of the lawsuit with the landowners. That's where the actual wall is going to be built across their land. Any question of standing for them?
Much stronger case of standing. If you're a landowner and your property is going to be eminent domained or paved over for a wall, then you are suffering an immediate concrete injury to your property. And that is a very strong case for standing. Stronger, I would argue, respectfully, than the individual states who are suing on behalf of their general welfare or whatever the case may be. But if you're an individual landowner, that's a perfect example of someone who would be affected by this. I mean, you can imagine someone just living in Maryland who doesn't live on the border or near the wall. That's a hard case to make, that border wall and the federal funding being moved around affects them individually. But if you're a landowner and they took your property to build this wall, then boy, you should have a pretty easy path into the courthouse.
Now, is there a legal argument any different in the states, and that they're essentially arguing the same thing, that it's unconstitutional, what he's doing is a power grab, and he can't switch the money around like that?
Yeah, there will be parts that will be similar, because you have to attack, even if it may be unsuccessful, that he has, number one, the path to attacking Donald Trump's power is twofold. The point one is that there is no national emergency. Point two is that he doesn't have the power. And within that, you have to say he doesn't have the statutory power and he doesn't have the inherent constitutional authority. Those are uphill battles. They're challenging only because there are so many authorizing statutes, something around the order of 100. And then even if he fails at all of those, there's possibly just the inherent constitutional authority for the president to go against the express wishes of Congress in certain situations.
And that was the case you talked about with Youngstown.
That's right. Youngstown, yeah.
Let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We'll have a few minutes. I just want to talk briefly about a sixth grader arrested in Florida after refusing to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. Sixth grader. Now, it escalates from there, but I just want to touch on the idea of forced giving the Pledge of Allegiance. Do you have to do that if you're in public school or not? So let's take a break, come back with our friend Danny Cevallos.
Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127. Dean Obadala Show on Sirius XM Progress 127.
And welcome back, Dean Obadala Show. We're live right here. Our friend Danny Cevallos, last few minutes here. So Danny, a 6th grader arrested in Florida over the weekend, I guess on maybe Friday, for failing. He did not participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. He got up, he said, I'm not going to do this. And he said the flag was racist and described the national anthem as racist. And the substitute teacher said, if it's so bad here, why don't you go live in another country? And he said, well, they brought me here. And then teacher said, you can always go back. So this really gets ugly here. There's a little 6th grader saying this stuff and the substitute teacher's being a jackass. In any event, then the principal gets called because he's being disruptive, he won't sit down, and the kid literally gets arrested. He's 6th grader. Not to relitigate that part, what are the obligations? Say you're someone out there and they have kids in school or a grandkid, and the school said you got to stand up for Pledge of Allegiance. Does a kid have to stand up for the Pledge of Allegiance in public school?
Dean, I've represented maybe hundreds of juveniles in juvenile delinquency court, and the one lesson that I have for juveniles if they are having trouble with school administrators is this: eat the bust. We'll fight it later. Go to the principal's office, because this is a classic example where the kid had the rules on his side. Had he gone to the principal's office for failing to say the national or the Pledge of Allegiance, he would have won. They would have said, "Are you nuts? You're in the right." And this substitute teacher, was it really a substitute teacher?
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're a substitute teacher.
You're always going to fight a substitute teacher,
right? I know.
First day. How was your first day? I got a kid arrested. Wow.
Yeah,
good or bad?
You're going to die on that hill, like you. That's the issue you're going to have.
And substitute teacher's never going to be brought back. They said to the district.
Yeah,
that's what they said.
I mean, this guy already wakes up at the crack of dawn in hopes that he's going to get a teaching gig that day, and he blew his one job.
But you imagine like a 6th grader goes, "I think the national anthem's racist," and the teacher goes, "Why don't you go back to your country?" I'm like, "How? What are you doing teaching kids?
What teaching certificate? How did you? This is not the business for you."
So they're gone. That's the end of it. By the way, when we were on here, we were watching in the break. So Andy McCabe, who we started the show with, I will end the show with, was just on Anderson Cooper saying, I think Donald Trump might be a Russian asset. That might be provocative, hyperbolic stuff to sell some books. Telling the Gang of Eight there's a counterintelligence investigation, and nobody in the Gang of Eight, including Mitch McConnell or Devin Nunes, objecting on the record there to that is much more needs to be talked about. That, and I hope the media goes to Devin Nunes and goes to Mitch McConnell. Congress is out this week, but next week and go, is that true? Or they can go to Chuck Schumer. The Democrats were there. Nancy Pelosi go, is that true? Nobody objected. And they might say we can't comment on a Gang of Eight briefing would be fair. But I think it's more stunning, whatever they showed to Devin Nunes, who's a big Trumper, and Mitch McConnell, and said, we are investigating the President of the United States as potentially working against the United States and for Russia. And no one went like, are you out of your mind? You're the FBI. But whatever they showed them was enough for them to go, I'm not going to object here to this.
That's right.
That's, to me, ladies and gentlemen of the jury,
there it is.
I leave you with that. Danny, we're wrapping up. What do you want to read? Anything you want to
How
leave?
much time do we have, Dean?
45 seconds.
Oh, well, then I'd like to go into a slow rendition of the Pledge of Allegiance.
Danny, sorry. Go back to your country. Folks, thanks very much for listening. Danny, thank you very much for coming in. Tomorrow, all new live show. Danny's on Twitter at Cevallos Law. I'm at Dean Obadala on Twitter. I'm Needy. Follow me. Dean at deanofradio.com. Thanks for tuning in. Look forward to chatting with you tomorrow night right here at Sirius XM Progress 127.